Thanks for having me, everyone. It's great to be in Helsinki. I was here in this building about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, when the IPCC climate change report was being announced. And I got into this room, and it was filled with people. I was like, what's going on? And I was told by people here in Helsinki that everyone is interested in climate change here in Finland. And this is a full house because of that. And I was shocked because you don't see that outcome in many other countries. And I said, okay, I want to have a chance to talk to these people because it's very difficult to get people interested in some of the planetary scale, Earth scale challenges that we face. There's a lot of people over at Slush right now. I just came from there, and Slush is awesome and very exciting, and Helsinki is doing a wonderful job with Slush. But much easier to talk about how do you hire people, how do you raise your first $10 million, how do you get on the cover of a certain magazine, delivering pizza or something. More difficult to talk about how are we going to now tackle these very significant challenges that we face as humanity at humanity scale. And it involves things like understanding the composition of our air, which we can't even see and barely even breathe it, but it could be threatening our lives. These are the kind of problems I like to work on. And I've been with Tencent for 18 and a half years and done a lot of things at Tencent in that time. But about 5 years ago, I started thinking about what are the biggest challenges on Earth that we all need to focus on together? You know, and Tencent can contribute to these solutions. We can provide resources, but there's no way any one person can or company can tackle these challenges. So I'm going to talk to you about some ideas today for how next generation technology can actually make a difference. But first of all, I just want to make sure we're all clear about the challenges and some of the philosophies behind this. So I call the thinking behind there, as you can see, is it up on the slide? Okay. You know, I call it, how do we create a sustainable human Earth operating system? That is, humans, modern humans, we depend on a lot of technology and a lot of resources to do what we do. And the things that may have worked at a billion population on Earth, which would be 1800 roughly, or 2 billion population Earth, 1900, those practices, maybe we're finding now, not maybe, they do not scale well when you get to 7.6 billion today, and you're going to 8.5 billion at 2030. And we're finding that these practices that we've adopted to do the things we like to do are actually threatening our existence on Earth. It's a very big concept. People actually don't like you to speak in those terms, right? This can't be true, you know? My life could never be threatened. I'm not even going to go into that because we can see the catastrophes around us every day, and it's not even a joke anymore. So, people sometimes say, oh, you're the CXO of Tencent. You do moonshot investing. And I actually kind of hate this because it seems like because the company's larger now, has more resources, you're able to invest in crazy things. And this is not what I hope to be doing at all, but some things may be counterintuitive. The power, I thought, actually, I don't like the topic of a moonshot because it seems like you're kind of wasting money. But I also thought it was powerful because a moonshot is actually a great way to describe, from another perspective, what we all should be doing. So what's a moonshot? You say, I want to get to the moon, right? And what do you have to do to get to the moon? You have to foster all of these technologies that will get you to the moon. You started with your goal. The goal is get to the moon. How are we going to do it? We have to come up with technologies we don't have today, like these spacesuits. I hope you're all seeing this on, okay, good. Rockets, modules. The purpose of these technologies may not be useful outside of the context of that mission. Try walking around Helsinki right now in a spacesuit. It's not very helpful, but when you're on the moon, if you don't have it, you're dead in like half a second or something, right? All these life support systems, they're really only useful in that context. But they're very sophisticated, powerful technologies and essential for applying to that context. Now in our modern world, when you hear about like my kind of business at Tencent or what's happening with the internet, you hear about all these technologies, smartphones. Has everyone heard of AI before? Anyone been to an AI conference before? I mean, you got to know about it or else you're out of the loop. And it's almost like the technologies are telling us what we should be thinking about. AI, it's everywhere. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? But I'm saying, folks, that's good. That's fine. Let's build technologies, and we're not going to know all the applications of those technologies in advance. In fact, a lot of AI was built from gaming technology. So a lot of things happen unintentionally. However, as humanity, we need to go back to that moonshot mentality saying, what are we trying to solve for? Are we genuinely trying to solve for climate change on Earth? If you're really taking it seriously, and you really think that humans are facing an existential crisis from climate change, that's wartime footing, guys. Is anyone here wearing fatigues? You know, when the bombs go off in Helsinki, the people are going to say, okay, how do we defend the town? The fatigues go on, the guns come out. When you say, we have this tidal wave of unforecastable change coming, it could be drought, it could be storms, it could be all kinds of things that we don't know how to predict. It could be threatening our agriculture. Are we truly developing all the technology we can to fight it? And I say we've just barely started even focusing on the problem, let alone really developing these technologies. And everything here on this slide can be part of that solution. I want to talk about AI in this context today. The thing is, there are so many technologies that can be involved, but we're not really applying all of our effort towards solving that. So I'll get to that a little bit later in the talk. I think people in this crowd probably know a lot of the data, how quickly human population is rising, how much it's going to rise in the future. And this is an important concept to keep in mind, because we're not solving for today's world today. We're solving for that growing curve in human population, because even the solutions we have today, by the time we scale them up on the planet, if you just think of 10 years, by the time you've actually scaled something up in the planet, we've gone from 7.6 billion people to like 8.5 billion people. And then when you hit 8.5 billion people, there's no forecast out there that shows it's going to stop. That would be a catastrophic situation. No one's forecasted that. They're assuming it goes up to roughly 9.5, 10 billion by 2050. So even when you solved it by 8.5, we're still growing. So we are actually having, what happens with population increase is that we just have more resource usage, more demands for food, more demands for water, more demands for energy. It's a compounding, complex problem. So getting it right for today doesn't mean you're ready for when you actually are going to be deploying this at scale. That's the challenge we have ahead of us. And then we can look at all these factors. I think here people are aware of CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere, of these trends that we need to acknowledge are happening. But I find it very interesting, some of the quotes we've been seeing recently, and the relatively timid global response to them. If a scientist is telling you that the atmosphere has not seen this level of CO2 for 15 million years, that means we're about to take ourselves into a planetary situation that has not been experienced for 15 million years. Let's just say it's a big statement. These are the things that we're going against. So what do we have? We see more typhoons, droughts, wildfires. I actually, to be honest, I made this slide about a month ago. And there's a whole section I'm not going to show you on this slide, but I was talking about wildfires in my hometown of Santa Rosa, California, which is about an hour north of San Francisco. And I did a speech in China in 2017 saying that that was the biggest set of fires that California ever had. And then I made this slide in October showing that the fires in California in 2018 were 161% greater than 2017. And that was before we had these catastrophic fires a few weeks ago. The Camp Fire, many people are still missing, many people have died. And so I don't even know what that new number is now. I thought we'd be over at end of October, 161% more than the year before. Okay, you've set your new record. Well, nature doesn't work that way. It doesn't accommodate our assumptions, unfortunately, right? So I often feel like humanity is a little bit like this picture, and unfortunately this has become a more common sight because you've seen the pictures and the videos coming from these California fires. But I kind of see humanity as we're all in this car looking around at the hills burning around us and kind of wondering if this is really that big of a deal, trying to get to our work, trying to go along our daily lives. And we're all feeling a bit paralyzed, like this actually looks pretty dangerous. I guess we're all going to go to work right now. And I'm saying we need to get out of that mindset, and we need to say, this fire around us can kill us. It's one jump across the highway from changing my life right now. What can I do to make a difference? All of us, especially people in the sciences, but let's push the pressure more onto getting more people involved, because scientists have probably been doing more than anyone in this area. Business people, leaders, we all need to be doing more. But how do we get out of the state of mind of paralysis and kind of wanting things to be the way they've always been, being very comfortable, to actually tackling these things? And the great news is there's a lot of ways to tackle these challenges. Okay, So we need a new architecture for Earth, for our growing needs. We need to do the things we've become accustomed to doing, but we need to do them more intelligently. And I'm going to talk about the areas that I think are the most important to tackle. Going back to that moonshot thinking, what are the areas that we absolutely need to prioritize as humanity the most to get right at 7.6 billion people, 8.5, 9.6, 10 billion, and beyond? That's our goal, is to live here on Earth for as many, I don't know, is it called millennia as possible? Because anything other than that, you're saying that humans have a limited time in a very short planetary timescale. If you don't say it's going to be for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, you're saying, humans, let's do this for another 200 years, folks, and that's it. It's not a very optimistic view. So how do we do it for millennia? And I'd say there's 3 key areas that we absolutely must get right. There's many areas, but I want to actually, for this talk about the importance of food, energy, and water, and I call it FEW to make it easier for people to remember this. I don't think anyone here would argue with this, and if you do want to argue that food, energy, and water aren't that important for humanity to get right, I'd like to invite you, because you don't believe in it, to go without these things for a day. No food, no water, no energy. And then we'll come back and say, yeah, I think we all need it. Because we know we have to have these things to survive, and everyone on the planet needs it. When we add 1 billion people, we need to responsibly accommodate those 1 billion people and make sure they have these things. Food, energy, and water are all intricately related to each other. And so when you solve for one, you're actually solving for the other. And that's part of the promise and excitement in actually cracking problems in these areas. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. But first, I want to put the challenge in context. So I'm showing you a graph now of a study done by NASA and the Jet Propulsion Lab in America called the GRACE study that uses satellites that are circling the planet. And they ran this study for a very long time. The data here is for 2002, 2016. I don't know where these satellites are right now. I apologize for that. Maybe someone could look it up. But this is the data for that 14-year period of time. And what it shows is parts of the world where water is migrating away or is increasing. The blue areas are where the actual volume of water has been increasing on land. And the red areas are where you've seen a significant withdrawals of water. Water is migrated out of those areas. And so when you look at a map like this, what you're seeing is a longitudinal rendering of how assumptions about water availability are changing. And this has an impact on everything because we have built our cities around these assumptions. We built our agricultural capabilities, our power generation. We've built it around assumptions about water being available. And then when water migrates from one place to another, you're left with populations saying, well, what about all those things I used to do here? I thought it would rain at this time of the year. I thought there would be water under the ground. But when I pumped it, it went somewhere else. It's not refreshing itself, recharging itself. So these are some, again, these long-term planetary challenges that we have to be looking out for. And it's going to affect life for many people on Earth in many conditions, as you can see, how India, China, the Middle East is very red. And then you also see blue areas. There could be more opportunities there, or you could have significant flooding. We have to understand more what's happening. But I'm going to just talk about now, for example, if you think about FEW, food, energy, and water, and how they relate to each other, I just want to show some data on that. So this is a graph of my home country, United States, and how does the United States use water? About 40% of water goes towards thermoelectric power generation. Okay, that's a big surprise to a lot of people. They think that coal makes a turbine. You know, you have coal-fired plants, so you burn coal, you get energy. Well, it's coal and water in combination, creating water vapor, moving a turbine, and having a generator. And this is actually a significant, there's significant requirements for water to make those processes work that we all assume will be there. Another big consumer of water will be agriculture, and that's better understood. But exactly how important it is, I think some people don't understand. When you put these two areas together, you're talking about most of the water consumption in a nation state, in a region, depending on your region, of course. And therefore, getting these areas right has huge promise. If you can save water in these areas, which I want to talk about later. But for those of you who are doing your job, taking a shorter shower, not wasting too much water when you wash your hands. That's a beautiful thing to do your part. But in the overall scheme of things, you can see the impact that has versus how much water that power generation sector is using, or agriculture. And for those of you who are fond of nuclear energy, there could be good reasons to use nuclear, but don't forget that that has significant water requirements as well. So what kind of design are you using? Are you using salt water? Are you taking it from the sea? Are you next to the sea, therefore? Or are you using freshwater resources? Let's not just say, oh, the future is nuclear. Some people say that. If you have a lot of water, the future is nuclear. If you're next to the sea, maybe it is. It depends on your design. But don't just say the future is nuclear and forget that water is part of that resource. The heat is going to turn water into water vapor and cooling and all these requirements. And nuclear uses a huge amount of water. Now, I just wanted to make it clear, how is it 40% of the water in the United States is used for thermoelectric power generation, just to show you the breakdown. Significant coal economy, nuclear, natural gas. So I guess some of the things are getting smashed up on the slide. But actually, I was surprised how renewable the Finnish energy sector is becoming. I think these non-renewable sources like biomass and coal, I think it's roughly, the mixture is about 35% here, and about 30% to 35% nuclear, and then you have some of these renewable sources like hydro. So actually, Finland is well on its way to making energy transition. Again, talking about this relationship, so roughly 27% of the US power production now is at risk because of water shortages. In other countries, it can be more like 40%. In India, you can just see, water, they have huge water stress. So if you were going to invest in energy resources in India, I would say, without knowing the details of what's happening on the ground there, very risky if it's a water-sensitive method versus wind, solar. I think geothermal has much lower water requirement content amount. So you have all these other alternatives. Why you should go to renewables versus building traditional sources of energy? It goes beyond just cost. A lot of the discussions on this is are PV cost lower than coal now? And you see these trade-offs, and now it finally is, so people should be investing. That's part of the equation. The question is, if you're in India and you have significant water stress, you're going to go for coal-fired plants. I hope you have a lot of water in your region rather than just wind power. And India does experience power outages all the time because of these water shortages. That's documented. Okay. So I'm going to argue that one of the hot topics of our time is actually a very powerful solution for addressing these challenges. And I actually came across this finding not because I work for Tencent, an internet company that does a lot with AI. I'm actually quite open to the solutions that work on the planet. And there's many that don't have anything to do with these technologies. By the way, just go vegan. If you want to impact the planet, there's so much ecological damage and climate change related factors coming from just meat consumption. There's many solutions out there to address the problem. And one of the most powerful ways people could address that is just by changing their diet. But if we talk about cutting edge technology, I've been really impressed by the gains in AI that I want to show you here, and the power of software to transfer around the globe and rapidly make an efficiency gain. Now, when we talk about efficiency gains, just to be clear, if you're going to, let's say, generate electrons from a power generation process, you're trying to minimize your resources going into the process, like water or coal, and maximize the electrons coming out. That's just good business sense, by the way. That's what any good business, coal is a cost, water is a cost. Limit those costs, maximize your output. This is like, business 101. Everyone should get excited about this. Hopefully all the coal power plant execs will get excited about this, because at least we can maximize electrons coming out of the process while minimizing the inputs. Now, we've seen really powerful examples of AI applied to food in terms of optimizing agriculture, minimizing, let's say, water as an input, maximizing the output of productivity in terms of crops. Energy is a new area that I think is a massive opportunity for Helsinki and Finland, because you have a strong global competence and reputation for energy efficiency. And when you bring the AI era into that, you now have created an exportable competency, an exportable product, exportable companies. Because if you try to export your very intricate architecture that you use here with waste power being recycled through industry and the consumer sector and residential sector, that's a hard model to be adopted in another city because it's been, it's infrastructure, it's physical, physical infrastructure. So, and we've seen great examples with water optimization. For water treatment, for example, how do you minimize your inputs, maximize your output? I just want to show you some data from this. So, in the case of outdoor agriculture, we saw, for example, this year in the US Midwest, one of our partner companies, actually Phytech is based in Israel, they're global though, they saved roughly, if they had applied their technology to all of the pivots that water for corn in the US Midwest alone, they probably would have saved about 4 months of US household water usage. They're getting roughly 40% water reduction. And as I showed you in that slide, now that was applied to all of agriculture, but if you could just aggregate a savings in a nation like the US, 40% roughly of water going towards agriculture, and if you could save 10% of that or 20%, that's 4 to 8% of the national water budget that you just saved by being more efficient. And they're doing this while increasing the agricultural yield. So there's no loss in yield, there's a gain in yield because the plants are actually healthier. Plants don't want too much water. Some assumptions on that, they actually probably like as much sunlight as possible. You probably want to maximize photons on the leaves. But water, you can actually overwater, and now you've put your plants into another kind of stress situation. And they saved about 2 weeks of national water budget in Australia by applying their technology just to almond trees alone. And they have a huge market share in doing their artificial intelligence for agriculture for almond trees. So we're looking at, okay, I'm going to skip that. We've seen, this is a complicated slide. Okay. We've been applying artificial intelligence to indoor farming with a university in the Netherlands called Wageningen. Has anyone here heard about Wageningen, WR? So we work with them on something called the Autonomous Greenhouse Challenge. It's going to end next week. And we've been running this for about 4 months. And it started out with a hypothesis, and we were open to seeing any answer. Can AI outperform human beings in an indoor farm where you have sensors and actuators all automated, and you want to see, can humans grow the food better than the AI? There's 5 AI teams that are competing together, Microsoft, Intel, Tencent, and 2, a group of people coming from industry, some students that have a great group. And we saw, this is actually a little bit older data of, I guess it's almost a month old, sorry about that. Whereas this time, 3 teams were performing better than the human control group. And we're seeing the AI continues to perform very strong. We did see the humans are improving. I think the humans are learning from the AI being done. And they're also shifting their techniques, which is maybe a little bit, interesting how humans can incorporate knowledge coming back from learnings in AI. And so I think there's a lot to be said about humans and AI working together to achieve a goal. But we're seeing really great results that we can see that AI can grow food more productively in an indoor farm than humans. And it does that by understanding more sensory input and the relationship between more data factors and input factors. Just think of all the factors you have to consider: the amount of light, the amount of water, the amount of nutrition, the amount of temperature. All of this is measured with sensory data. It's a bit too much for the average human brain to handle, and has to make the AI makes decisions in real time how to optimize the usage of those inputs to maximize the output in the indoor farm. So great. And then we see this also applied to water utilities. So I think I'm going to open it up to questions from there. These are, by the way, this slide here is just showing how you can save so much energy, so many inputs, while maximizing the flow of fresh water from a water treatment plant. And to me, I think this looks a lot like the processes that we haven't really seen happening in the startup market yet. Maybe some big coal-fired or other types of energy facilities are doing this globally. We don't know about it. We'd love to learn more about it. But if it's not happening, we think it needs to be happening in the same way where, for, let's say, thermoelectric reactions, you have amount of coal, you need to minimize that, you have amount of water that you use, you're going to turn a turbine. We think there's going to be significant room to improve the efficiency we get out of these operations. And many people maybe don't like this slide because it seems like it's actually tolerating something like coal or these, let's say, dirtier power generation practices. But the truth is they exist around the world. And many territories are dependent on them. We need to move off of them, but in the immediate future, I'm talking about within months, we could potentially use software to make an operation more efficient, burning far less coal, using far less water. That water can be available for something else. We don't have to endure the pollution, the cost, all of those issues, while we figure out more solutions. And the thing I love about AI is that it's software, it moves at the speed of light, the data can be incorporated in a model in a matter of days, weeks, months. Try to shut down a factory and put up PVs, it's going to take more time than that. So it's a solution that I would encourage humanity to adopt immediately and deploy immediately around the world. Once we know this works, actually, there's no business reason for the owner of a coal-fired plant not to deploy this because they're simply going to make more money. They're going to sell more electrons and have less cost, but at the same time, they're also saving the planet. Yeah, let me open it up to questions because, okay, there's a bunch more slides here, and it's just going to probably confuse people more. So why don't we just open up? Let me try to end this on a happy note here. All right. Okay, there we go. Yeah. So let's open up to questions.
Excellent.
Thank you. I assume I was running past my allocated time.
Not to worry.
Okay.
It was very interesting. So,
Okay. Thank you.
No harm done. Are there any immediate questions I could ask one because in Finland it takes a long time for people to get the courage to ask questions.
Okay.
So my question is that, AI essentially makes things more efficient.
It's very effective when you apply it to that. I mean, AI can optimize a lot of different outcomes. It can accomplish a lot of different tasks for you, but I think it's particularly good at optimization. I mean, AI is ultimately about, you can optimize anything. You can optimize for happiness. You can understand that I'm always happy when I have a Diet Coke in the morning and when I go for a run, and you can recommend that to me in a smartphone app. Have your Diet Coke, go for a run, you'll be happier, happier, happier. And that's a lot of the apps that are being developed now in the consumer market are kind of these types of things. But it can also optimize, how do I make more food grow? How do I get more fresh water out of this process with less resource? How do I get more electrons out of a process?
So, and that's exactly my question. So how do we know that AI isn't just an engine that makes this thing go faster to hell, essentially?
Oh, no. I wouldn't blame AI for that. Are you saying,
I wouldn't, but I'm just saying that, if it's a system that makes things go faster, why doesn't mean that we just go faster?
What's going faster? What's the thing going faster in your mind?
Well, emissions, for example.
Well, no, in my example, I was saying, so let me be clear. Society right now in Finland today, a certain amount of electricity is demanded.
Quite right.
We've got these lights on, we're doing everything, okay? And you can actually see the mixture of resources that are required to give us the electricity we demand right now. What I'm saying is let's create as much electricity as possible while minimizing the resources. But that's different than actually saying, how do we stop people from demanding electricity? Which if you really wanted to stop a system that didn't use renewable electricity, that was based on coal, you might have to say, okay, we just stop everyone from demanding electricity. But let's assume that we let everyone demand this amount of electricity. Then what we want to do is we want to achieve that level of electricity with the minimum amount of resources required.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge from day one. Right now you're burning, let's say this is amount of coal. To get this electricity in this room right now, there is coal being burnt in Finland right now. It's here. How do we now take it down to here and get that same amount of coal, as well as water? There's these different inputs. I think coal and water are the two clear inputs for everyone to think about. But that's the goal, is just moving it down. Same amount of electricity. We're not saying people don't get to turn on lights right now. We don't get to have that light. We're saying that's fine, just less resources to go into it. So I don't think it's moving faster. It's actually allowing things to maybe grow or stay the same with much less resource expenditure, much less You get what I'm saying? Okay.
I
you have
do,
to burn
I
the
do.
coal. It goes on fire. It's gone. Yeah.
This I understand.
Do less of that.
This I understand.
Yeah.
Do we have some questions? There is a
I guess it takes a few minutes to warm up. I'd love to get some questions. So, you want to get a microphone for you? Just to make sure others can hear you, the question. Oh, is that the microphone right there? Okay, I just want to make sure others can hear you. I could also try to repeat the question. My Finnish isn't very good, though. So, I have to do it in... Sorry, but
I can repeat it.
Okay,
yeah.
you repeat it? Yeah. Okay.
So how do you see, I mean, cities can be seen as systems that can be endlessly optimized by AI, but at the same time we want to have a high quality of life and,
Yeah.
I don't know, people meeting each other and falling in love, coming up with new ideas and all that.
Yes.
So how do you, in some ways, bring the AI here? What's your vision there?
Okay, so I would start first
Shall
with
I
the... Okay,
repeat
yeah.
it? I
The
don't
question
know
was
if
how do
this is going
cities...
in Exactly. So,
No, I
If
just make sure, yeah. How do
So-
cities optimize? And I was gonna follow with a question that will help people understand what the question was, because you were
ahead.
saying you want AI to optimize the things we do kind of for enjoyment in a city and the quality of life in a city.
Do you see a conflict between this model of, because we want to be...
Is there a conflict between this model of wanting to have a nicer, fun life and bring in AI? Is that the question?
No, maybe because we have very high and ambitious, for example,
Yeah.
target of being carbon neutral and all these things,
Okay.
which I think fit very well to this model. But at the same time, we want to have a very high quality of life and,
Yeah.
I don't know, a lot of these softer values. And how do we bring this optimization that AI can bring so that we cherish, I mean, meet the both means and goals?
I think we can do it all, but we have to be very specific about what we're trying to optimize for first. And the quality of life might mean different things to different people. And I think it's important to agree upon that. For me, I think healthcare is an important thing maybe everyone can agree on. It's much better to be healthy than sick. So we can agree on that. Then we can actually measure that, and we can say, how can we use as much data as possible and understand the data, what causes illnesses, what causes cancer, and then how can we actually, based on a deeper understanding of those factors, by having more data available and being able to do more analysis and prediction from that data, can we now can we solve those problems? Can we attack those problems? But you have to be very specific in setting up your question and setting up your desires. So I think what happens is AI forces us to have to be extremely clear about what we're trying to optimize. It doesn't work in a vacuum. It only works based on the data, what we decided to measure, and what we decided to then compare and analyze, or the direction we pointed the technology at based on the available data. And if we don't have available data, that might be because we're not measuring something, and we may not be measuring something because we don't have the necessary sensors to measure it. So we may need to use satellites over the Earth in a way we didn't use before. We may need to use handheld diagnostics for our health in a way we didn't use before. There's something you can spit into it, pee into it, take a little amount of blood, and say, oh, you have a marker in here that tends to correlate for someone with your background with cancer. You escalate that to the next diagnostic, right? Maybe there's something that goes a little bit further, a little bit more blood drawn. Okay, there seems to be even more evidence that you may have cancer based on the signature of cell-free DNA in your blood. Then you escalate it again, and guess what? You found out that you had stage 1 cancer or something like, you see what I was saying? But you had to be very specific that we're going to try to solve for cancer, and we're going to build the sensors and diagnostics to be able to help us identify that. And then AI, once we have the data, can help us understand how those data points relate to other data points and other trends. So I think we can have it all, but we need to get more systematic about what we're actually trying to solve for. So that's what I think. Yeah.
Do we have another question? There's a gentleman.
Thanks for the questions, by the way. Kind of sucks if no one has a question.
Hi. So I'm thinking of challenging you a little bit.
Okay, good.
So I'm thinking, aren't we supposed to phase out the old technologies for energy production instead of making them even more efficient than today? Reducing the input, if you will, the coal, the oil, etc. If we reduce the amount of resources needed in order to produce energy, then those technologies will become more powerful than before, and people will use them even further. since we're improving those technologies.
Right. So does by making, let's say, a coal-fired plant more efficient, do you actually now keep it alive longer or keep it going longer?
Sure.
It's a really good question. The truth is, I think we just have to look at the planet in a very realistic global sense. Do you really think that every city on Earth, every nation on Earth is going to shut down their coal-fired plants? You almost in a way, you make a gamble because you would say, to do that, I will not do anything to make those processes more efficient, thereby definitely making the world safer for everyone, even if it's only 20% or 30% efficiency that you drove. That's a huge gain, by the way. 20, 30% is very meaningful on a global scale. You would have to say, let's all agree on planet Earth that we're just going to shut down every single one of these plants, and if you don't have electricity for 3 years because you don't have a good backup plan, deal with it. I've been a little discouraged by what I've been seeing happening in my own home country. America is very distracted right now. It's 30% coal. I think it's not an insult to say that the government, I think, denies there's any problem with climate change, and not an insult to say they actually want more coal. I think that's just a factual interpretation of what the public statements are. So I'm thinking in those terms, saying, okay, if there are interests on the planet, and I hear bad things about Australia or whatever, if there are interests on the planet that are so wedded to coal, they're willing to threaten the rest of the planet for it. Take a gamble. Maybe they know something we don't know, but they're going to take a gamble with everyone's life on it, right? Then I would say, okay, you want to use coal, but you're still business people. You still want to be profitable. You still want to maximize dollars. Your goal isn't really to burn as much coal as possible. You just want to sell as much electricity possible with this factory that you have. You already invested in it, or you want to sell them to more people. You want to sell more factories, coal, power generation factories. Let's be smart business people and just limit that stuff as much as possible, and also the water-related impacts as much as possible to get your electricity as one of the solutions we have available to us. Of course, it's just better, it's safer for the whole planet just to go to wind and solar and these kind of methods that don't have a water requirement, let alone the greenhouse effect. There's a lot of different challenges we're thinking about managing here. I would say because it's really hard to get everyone on Earth on the same page, and there's some interests on the planet so wedded to coal, they're going to be willing to risk their families' lives and their nation's lives on it. Basically, one of the factors is then why not embrace this option to at least minimize these dangerous factors in the process and have a mechanism to discourage the use of the material while maximizing the electrons. But ideally, I would agree with you. Just get rid of it. I mean, ideally, we could just go back and start again. The problem is lock-in. It's actually institutional lock-in. If we could all start today, I think there's very few people that think they have to dig this stuff out of the ground. It's not really the best way. But it's already there. No one wants to change. Everyone changes their attention to something else. As soon as my speech is done, we go to something. This is just how it is. The status quo is what's going to kill us. It's just riding out the current situation is what's really going to endanger us over time. And the thing is that the status quo got us to where we are today. It made us more safer. We live longer. We live healthier than we ever had in history. So there's also other arguments saying, what's the big problem? We've never been richer. There's never been more progress on Earth, right? And this also kind of confuses things because that doesn't mean that the situation is static. We're actually putting the planet into a dynamic state where the conditions that got us to here may not even, if you just keep them going, may actually further and further endanger us. So that's where some of these positive arguments about actually people like me say climate change is bad, and actually you have to admit humanity never had it better, so stop worrying everyone. I think that fails to acknowledge that we're in a dynamic system. But I agree with your concern, but I still think we have to face it that so many people are not going to give it up. And meanwhile, we just have to do whatever we can to give us more time to show that the other options are so much better and just do the least amount of damage possible. So if we have 100 million gas-powered cars sold a year, I would say the least we could do, if you still want to buy those 100 million gas-powered cars a year, is to make it go as many kilometers as possible per liter. Because you could just say, stop the gas-powered cars, but there aren't enough electric vehicles out there. You can barely meet the demand. I mean, the companies making electric vehicles cannot meet the market demand. They can't manufacture the cars fast enough. So at least we can do is drive that liter of fuel per kilometers traveled as much as possible. You know, this efficiency notion can apply to everything, and I think we have to adopt it and stop thinking that the solution is to get rid of the gas-powered cars. I would love to see that, but it takes time to make these architectural transformations. So meanwhile, let's do what we know how to do, which is to maximize the amount of kilometers traveled per liter of fuel, just as another kind of example. But it's a really good question.
Thank you. Unfortunately,
Okay.
we are going to have to close because David is being waited somewhere else.
Maybe
and we're already
after this talk.
Yeah. But you know, shoot him off Twitter or somewhere, you know, with extra questions, and
I tweet
I'm sure
sometimes.
he'll be happy to answer them.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Mr. David
Thank you.
Wallerstein.